The great thing about short stories is they're like playgrounds. You can try out some strange new concept you have, or you could try out some strange POV like second person, and it's not going to take you 6 months to a year to actually write it. You'll just, spend a week writing a short story. So short stories train you in all the storytelling tools, but with low risk. In this video, we're going to cover 8 steps to write your short story, and if you go through all 8, your short story is definitely going to be better because of these steps. Let's start with number 1. Your story should start in the first sentence. When you write a novel, you have a lot of leeway. You can start your story, meaning starting like the conflict or the inciting incident. You can start it at the end of the first paragraph or maybe a couple pages in, or sometimes even at the end of the first chapter. You cannot do that with a short story. You have such little space. You absolutely have to start right away. And if you don't start quickly enough, you're not going to have enough space in the rest of the story to actually do the storytelling. Let's look at an example from Richard Ford, his story collection, Rock Springs. Look at this very first sentence. Edna and I had started down from Kalispell, heading for Tampa, St. Pete, where I still had some friends from the old glory days who wouldn't turn me in to the police. This is a sentence which starts the story because 1, we have movement, they're driving, they're already in action. 2, we have danger. The police are clearly looking for him. And then 3, we have a sense of mystery. What has he done to get the police after him? Look at that, the very first sentence, and the story has already started. Let's look at another first sentence from Dennis Johnson's Jesus' Son. I met the first man as I was going home from a dance at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. So first of all, we have movement, we have action, we know where he was and where he is going. Second, there is a meeting. This is the launch of the story, this meeting with this other person. And the most important word in this whole sentence is first, the first man, which implies that there's going to be a second person that he meets as well. So in your short story, if your first sentence is describing someone with no sense of tension or action, or talks about the weather or the setting, or just introduces someone with 0 sense of conflict, that is a problem, and I would strongly recommend that you try to start the story earlier. This next tip to write a short story is probably the most important one in this whole video. It is number 2. First equals scene, second equals backstory. This is such a famous strategy when writing short stories. It is almost a cliche. Everybody uses it. But even though it's really commonly used, I'm still recommending you use it because it works. It's a really good strategy. What this means is in your first scene, you start with a scene. You actually have people doing things. And then in the second section of the story, you go into the backstory of the characters, who they are and what they're doing and why. So it was really easy to find an example of this. I literally walked to the section of my bookcase which holds all my short story collections, and I picked one out at random and I turned to the very first short story, and guess what? It used this technique. It was Hannah Tinty Animal Crackers, which is a whole short story collection themed around animals. So she starts her story with a scene. 2 people need to wash an elephant and they're breaking out the hoses to wash this elephant down. And then the second section of the story goes into her backstory. Oh, Sandy runs the monkey house. Back in college, she studied biology and zoology. Oh, and by the way, we went out on a date once. So a lot of beginning writers, when they first start writing short stories, will reverse this order. They will start with the summary and backstory, the more general information about a character, and then bridge into a scene. That's not necessarily wrong. Of course, you can write a short story that does that. I'm just saying that most of the time, it'll grab the reader's attention more if you start with a scene and then go back and tell us more about this character. If you want to learn more about scenes, I would recommend signing up for BookFox LAB, which is my coaching program. I'll put the link in the description. The third step or stage to writing a short story is the quadrangle of story. So Damon Knight has a great book called Creating Short Fiction, and in it he shows this rectangular shape where you need to have these 4 things in every single story that you're telling. Character, setting, situation, and emotion. You can start your story with any one of these, although setting is probably the hardest one to start with. And then as the story expands, move into the other categories. So let's look at a Flannery O'Connor short story called Good Country People. She starts with characters. She introduces the neighbor, she introduces the mom, and she introduces the daughter Joy. And then she bridges into the setting. Oh, this is in the south of the US. Joy has a wooden leg, she has a PhD, and at 32, she's still living with her mom. Now, the next part of the story is the situation. A Bible salesman comes along, tries to sell them Bibles, but there's something shady about him and he tries to seduce Joy. The emotion comes at the end of the story where we're totally surprised to learn that this Bible salesman is a wicked dude. He tricks her, he steals her wooden leg and abandons her in the loft of a barn. Now, you don't have to follow that order for your story. You could start with, say, situation and then move on to setting and then move on to character. But the point is, you can mix and match these four in any way to sort of trot out the steps in writing your short story. And I'll also say you don't have to do these independently. A lot of the scenes are going to do 2 or 3 of these at the same time. But I do think you need to make sure that you have all 4 of these components in your story to make it feel fleshed out and to make it feel real. Now, this next point is the one that writers struggle with the most. It is number 4, novelistic pace versus short story pace. Some of you are probably runners. I myself used to be a runner before a series of unfortunate injuries sidelined me, alas. But you runners out there know the difference in the pacing of how you run a marathon versus how you run a 5K. A 5K, you are just unleashing on that pavement and just going all out. A marathon, you got to pace yourself so you don't die at mile 21 or 22. That sort of pacing matches the difference between short story pacing and novel pacing. So what occupies an entire page in a novel might be condensed down to, say, a paragraph in a short story, or a 5-page scene in a novel might only be a 1-page scene in a story. You have to tighten everything in your short story so it's very, very compressed. And you also have to examine in your short story, is a single scene occupying, say, 30% of the real estate of the pages in your short story? If so, that might be a clue that you need to trim it down and keep the pacing going a little bit faster in that section. So we're gonna have a little pacing competition now. We're gonna set up Amy Bender, a short story writer of Call My Name, against a novelist, John Steinbeck's East of Eden. Let's look at the first couple sentences of Amy Bender first. I'm spending the afternoon auditioning men. They don't know it. This is a secret audition. Come as you are. That is so tight, it's so crystalline, it's so compressed, nothing is wasted, and it starts really quickly. In comparison, let's look at Steinbeck's East of Eden. He talks about the geography of the Salinas Valley. He talks about his memories of all the smells and flowers there. This is a leisurely pace. He's like, I'm gonna get to the story. Be patient. Now, you might be saying, John, this is just a stylistic issue. Some authors are more clipped, some authors are more long-winded. And, you know, that's a valid objection, but I do think in broad general strokes, short stories tend to be much more compressed and tight and clipped, and novels you can take a lot more time. This next one is super clutch to write a good short story. It is number 5. The most important unit of the short story. So what's the most important unit of a novel? It's the scene, right? It's basically a series of scenes connected together. You make enough scenes, great, you have a whole novel. The most important unit of a short story, however, is a sentence. Now, no one cares if you write a bad sentence in a novel because there are just a lot of other sentences to sort of cover up your mistake and cloak it. However, if you write a bad sentence in a short story, it's gonna stick out like a sore thumb. Everyone's going to notice it and it's gonna ruin the experience for the readers. Now, there is some hefty competition for the absolute worst sentence in the world, but I think I found it. This is steamy Jane Austen fan fiction. Yes, it is. And it is a sequel to Pride and Prejudice, and it's called The Bar Sinister, Pride and Prejudice Continues. So check out this sentence. Propitious fortune allowed her to descry whom the crepuscular light yielded. Do you know what that means? I don't, and I'm not sure I want to try to figure it out. So if you write a single bad sentence, yes, even one that bad, and it's in a novel, you can be forgiven because all the other sentences will cover your sin. But put that in a short story, and it is a significant portion of the story, maybe 0.5% or percent of the whole thing. Essentially, in a novel, you can make mistakes, and they're forgiven because the other parts are so good. In a short story, on the other hand, everything has to be perfect. There can be no dead weight. Everything has to contribute to the whole. And if you want to work more on your sentences, I have a sentence course which you should take. You can buy it as a standalone course, or you can subscribe to Bookfox Academy and get all 10 of my courses. Link is in the description. Now, for this next point, we want to talk about scope. Let's look at number 6, novelistic scope versus short story scope. This honestly is the most difficult thing for people who are coming to short stories to grasp, because they've been trained their entire life on movies and TV series and novels, and all of those are really big stories, expansive stories. So their imagination has been trained, oh, like to tell a story, it looks like this. It's big, it's far-reaching. On one level, that's amazing. I mean, you have a great imagination, you're imagining all these worlds and characters and things happening. That's wonderful. Unfortunately, it doesn't really fit inside a short story. Have you ever raced go-karts and they put a governor on the engine? They do that so you can't go too fast in it, right? You have to put a governor on your imagination when you are writing short stories to limit yourself to this tiny little space. Let's contrast a novelistic scope with a short story scope. The novel we'll look at is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It is 7 generations of a family. It is, as you can tell from the title, spanning an entire century, and it covers all of this political and cultural intrigue. It's so far-reaching. On the other hand, look at a short story like Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway. The whole story takes place in a single setting, over 40 minutes, as 2 characters talk to each other while waiting for the train. So the most frequent thing that I have to say to beginning short story writers is what you have written is the first chapter of an epic 7-book series. You have not written a short story. First chapters of a novel open up the storyline and let us know, like, oh, there's all these new directions to go in. While short stories, the end of the story sort of closes it off and resolves it in some way. This next question is a question I get a lot about short stories. It is number 7. What is the perfect length for a short story? So I've actually done a great blog post about this. I'll put the link to it in the comments. And what I did is I took a lot of famous short story authors, looked at their most famous works, and then averaged out the word count for each story. So for Gabriel Garcia Marquez, most of his short stories are pretty short. I'm talking about like 2,400 words was the average. But you look at someone like Alice Munro and whoa, Nelly, all right, now we're talking more like 10,000 word short stories. Then you have a character like Hemingway who writes both pretty short stories, and then he has a couple ones which are longer. Or you have an author like Poe who generally writes shorter short stories, say about 3,000 words. So what I did is I averaged them all out across all authors, and I came to a number of 5,000 words. Now, if you took out outliers like Munro, you'd end up with something more like 4,000 was the average, but something between 4,000 and 5,000 words is the sweet spot. But let me say this. It is okay if your first draft is 7,000 to 8,000 words. Very natural, happens all the time, very common. I edit a lot of short stories and a lot of people send them to me at that length. And so part of the job that I have with them is trying to figure out, okay, what can we trim away and cut down and condense so that this is more like the 5,000 word count. Do not send out an 8,000 word short stories to literary journals. It's 10,000 times harder to get it published than say a 3,000 word short story. And now it's time for the very last point, number 8. Writing a short story ending. And I put that in quotes because really a short story ending is often different than the feeling of a novel ending. Novels tend to end very definitively. They tend to tie up all the loose strands, wrap it all up neatly, and leave the reader like very satisfied and like, okay, everything's known. Short stories, on the other hand, because of their length, tend to allude a little bit more, to hint a little bit more, to not wrap everything up so neatly. I'm going to show you 4 examples of endings that can serve as models for how you might want to end your short story. First of all, the revelation ending. Think about Shirley Jackson's lottery story. You have all these people participating in a lottery, and then it's revealed at the end, surprise, that person is actually put to death. The second strategy for your ending might be called the resonant image ending. Look at Raymond Carver's Cathedral. The story ends with a man closing his eyes and being guided by a blind man as they draw a cathedral together. It's a nice moment where they have a breakthrough and there is this connection and understanding between them. 3, and this one's really popular, the ambiguous ending. In Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants, they're talking about an abortion for the whole short story, but we never learn whether or not they decide to do it by the end of the story. It's left up to the reader's imagination. And the 4th strategy you might use is the middle of the action ending. Joyce Carol Oates wrote a short story called Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? And it's about this teenage girl who's being sort of stalked by this Arnold friend, this creepy older guy. And the end of the story shows that she's going with him and we don't know what happens to her. So try one of those strategies for your story, see whether it works. If not, you could always try ending on a poignant line of dialogue, a story that ends with a significant physical action that one of your characters takes. Or, and here's always a good trick, is try to end the story 3 paragraphs before where you currently have it ended. That's always a good revision technique because you're like, I could end earlier and it would actually be better. Hey, I love short stories. I hope this video helps you write better ones. Make sure to check out the links below for BookFox Lab, my coaching program, Bookfox Academy, my 10 courses, and happy writing.